Okay, so see if we can't finish up, hopefully, in this video. But anyway, so last video we talked about the thyroid and the adrenal gland, so let's continue on. So the pineal gland is responsible for melatonin. You may recall this one from A&P1. It's superior, really, to the thalamus and kind of posterior to it. It was real evident in those sheep brains. And this is kind of a minor player. It was on our list, but it's, you know, we have to be very clear that this is not as far as what we understand, it's not a huge, highly important hormone. But melatonin is really, it's controlled by the amount of light. Okay, so the control is not the hypothalamus, and it's not really a substance in the blood or the neuron. So this, or neural, excuse me. So this is kind of one of those outliers, like oxytocin. Something different is actually doesn't, you know, things don't always fit nicely into packages and categories. So it's what, again, our circadian rhythms really are what we're talking about here with melatonin, and it is influenced by that, and in turn influences it. So there you see more melatonin in people's blood at night, less in the daytime, and it's known to really regulate when we feel tired and when we're falling asleep. It also influences our hunger and our overall body temperature. So again, at nighttime, when you're kind of on, you know, we call it sleep mode on a computer for a reason, because this is a low energy state in a computer. Well, you are too, so, you know, body temperature would fall in the nighttime, right? Appetite would be reduced. Okay, so incidentally, though, this of course has a lot to do with hibernation, and in other organisms, we just regrettably we don't hibernate, right? We also feel, or evidence suggests that this is influential in our fertility. So we think that higher levels are found. We know that there are higher levels in children, and this is maybe it might start to lower, and that's what leads us to puberty. So it may have some influence, feedback on the hypothalamus in that circumstance. We're pretty certain that it does influence the fertility cycles in other animals as well. All right, the gonadal hormones, right? So another category here. These are going to be the steroids, and gonadal means that the ovaries and testes make them. And the ovaries and testes are responsible, again, for the production, manufacture, production, and release of eggs and sperm, what we collectively call gametes. And they, of course, are responsible for what makes us identify as male or female when we talk about sexual characteristics. So testosterone, right, male, predominantly male hormone, and influencing primary and secondary traits. Estrogen, progesterone, the female, right, structures and the primary and secondary traits, as well as the maintenance of pregnancies. All right, placental hormones would fall into these categories, made though by the placenta, which is a temporary organ. It's only found during the pregnancy and for only about 6 months of the pregnancy. And this is a structure organ that's made by both mom and the fetus, embryo and fetus. A predominant one that we want to focus on just here, because we'll revisit this when we go on and talk about pregnancy development genetics at the end of the course, is human gonadotropin. So this is gonad influencing hormone. And then the placenta makes progesterone, it makes a placental lactogen, it makes a somatostatin, I think, and a number of other hormones. So again, produced by the embryo and placenta, which is part mom. This is the actual hormone that maintains the pregnancy, and this is what we test for when we do a pregnancy test. All right, so the placenta will cause the development of the breast further, the production of progesterone, relaxin, and it helps, the placenta helps prevent a mom from, right, rejecting the baby, the fetus, the embryo and the fetus that have implanted, because this is a genetically unique individual and so could be destroyed. So the placenta is responsible for all those things. The pancreas, so another major player. Interesting, we say a major player, however, most of the pancreas is not devoted to the endocrine. It's devoted to the exocrine, and that's what you see here in this histology, right? And you see this by evidence of all these ducts, right? Whereas the endocrine, these little islets here, would really be dumping their product into the blood, all right? So now, interesting enough, again, this is going to the pancreatic hormones are subject to control by a level of something in the blood, so humoral stimuli, and the major ones we're going to talk about are glucagon and insulin, and so they give you the alpha cells and the beta cells that make those compounds. All right, and this lovely cartoon just kind of helps you situate this is the circumstance where the pancreas lies and how it influences. So again, a lot of the pancreas is exocrine, as you see here, all this dark staining stuff, and would lead to and would be producing these digestive enzymes. But then a small percentage, about 1 to 5% of the structure, is endocrine, called the pancreatic islets or islets of Langerhans, and these cells will be responsible for making hormones. All right, so the alpha cells, again, are glucagon stimulated, right? In other words, glucagon is made when blood glucose levels are low, all right? The beta cells make insulin, and insulin is made, and most people already know this, when blood glucose levels are high. Okay? And then the delta cells make a compound somatostatin, which I'm not going to expect you guys to know, but we do want to clarify that those are there as well. And this is really a controller of both glucagon and insulin, right? And then lastly, I mentioned that there's these pancreatic polypeptide cells, and they influence appetite. So a lot to do with nutrients and especially, again, blood glucose. So why is glucose levels so important to maintain? Well, as I try to say here, and we'll say for the rest of the chapter, that your nervous tissue, right, central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, all these cells, all these neurons really need glucose. They do not and cannot use alternative nutrients for energy, right, to make ATP. So main source of many cells, but I said the nervous tissue especially, there always has to be a concentration of glucose in the blood so that it will enter. And the neural tissue really uses facilitated diffusion and isn't sensitive to insulin, but is highly sensitive to the presence and a set presence of glucose in the blood. So targets of the pancreatic hormones are going to be the liver, adipose, and skeletal muscle, because again, these are the targets when we're talking about the level of a nutrient, because these are the main tissues in which nutrients get stored, processed, used. All right. I mentioned, to help you get your minds around this, that you really live in a physiological state between feast and famine. All right. And so feast after you've eaten, and for a few hours after you've eaten, as many nutrients are available and entering the body, and your body's trying to figure out how to use them. Well, the body's being told how to use them. All right. And then if it's been a while since you've eaten, you are in a physiological famine state. Your blood glucose levels are dropping, the other nutrients in your blood are dropping, they're not available. So what does your body do to maintain its needs and still meet its energy? All right, so again, reiterated here, famine, glucose is falling. We need alternative fuels. To get those alternative fuels, we need this powerful director, glucagon. All right, so glucagon increases the breakdown of glycogen, which is stored in the liver and skeletal muscle. All right, and we call this process of breakdown glycogenolysis. Lysis is always a breakdown. Glucagon causes the increased formation of glucose. We saw this on a previous slide. That is called gluconeogenesis. Form new glucose, because again, remember, glucose levels in the blood are falling. And we're going to take that alternative again, and we're going to use fat. So in the process called it, so glucagon increases lipolysis, the breakdown of fats. All of this done to increase blood glucose, right? Stabilize it, keep it from falling further. In the feast state, there's too much glucose, right? And the answer to that problem is insulin. Again, liver, skeletal muscle, and adipose are going to be major players in this process. All right, so what is insulin going to do when there's too much glucose? Well, it's going to allow for the uptake of glucose and amino acids, especially by skeletal muscle and adipose. Liver doesn't show up here because liver is always able to take up insulin. Excuse me, always able to take up glucose. All right, so stimulates glycolysis. All right, so that the cells are using the glucose that they have, because remember glycolysis was the first step of cellular respiration. The glucose, if there's excess glucose, and there will be because it's feast state, the insulin causes the skeletal muscle and liver to convert it to glycogen, and here we'll call it glycogenesis, so genesis, formation of. Or when we've stored as much glycogen as we can in skeletal muscle or liver, we will then convert our biochemical pathway to taking these glucose molecules and making fat from them. So insulin stimulates lipogenesis, right? Insulin also stimulates the proteins. Amino acids are used to synthesize protein, so it increases protein synthesis as well. So insulin is a very anabolic hormone, right? A builder. Insulin will therefore decrease gluconeogenesis, right? That would be a problem if we were making new glucose when there's plenty around. And it's going to decrease the breakdown of glycogen, right? Because we don't want to release this. And again, I just remarked down here that there's certain structures I've already mentioned to you, the brain and the liver, which do not require insulin for glucose uptake. So these are not really going to be targets for that uptake of glucose. Right, so this cartoon nicely shows this idea, and they build in the idea of checking your blood glucose, right? So hyperglycemic, because again we're looking for about 70 to 110, and hypo, right? So hyper more, hypo less, right? So we live in a state between feast and famine, but in spite of where we are physiologically, we have to maintain glucose balance in this range. Okay, so this cartoon just kind of sums up what I've already said to you guys, right? If you are hyperglycemic, right, insulin is released. Insulin is going to solve that problem, and it's going to do this by getting glucose to be taken into cells and used for cell respiration. It's not going to let the liver break down glycogen, and it's not going to let the liver make new glucose, right? And so in this, if these occur, then blood glucose concentrations decrease. We're back to normal, all right? If blood glucose levels fall, again, hypoglycemic, then glucagon is released, right? And this, again, inhibits the uptake of glucose, right? Stimulates the breakdown of glycogen and stimulates gluconeogenesis. And all of this will increase blood glucose. All right? So that concludes our pancreas, and we really have just a few things left that we'll pick up on the last and final video.